Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Rosa Mendez Perez, and I'm the Executive Director of King Conservation District. And we're going to get started with the presentation. A little introduction before we get going. At King Conservation District, we are all about conservation and community. Our programs really try to empower community conservation through voluntary stewardship. And this includes education and technical assistance. While we've seen a lot of success with this model, engaging community members to try to undertake best practices when it comes to conservation, we are continuously looking for opportunities to increase our own knowledge and to increase community knowledge and engagement. One opportunity we are excited to share with you today is a demonstration project that studied riparian buffers so that we can turn this knowledge around and increase community understanding of this conservation practice. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kedija Awole. She brought her experience in agricultural research to King Conservation District and conducted the study you're about to hear about today, evaluating the effectiveness of riparian buffers on agricultural land. Thank you so much, Kedija, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I will just jump in. Okay, in this presentation, I will cover the brief history of this project, what's riparian buffer, why riparian buffer, about discovery farms and objectives of this study, and the study site's characteristics, materials and methods we used, and the result, conclusion, and recommendation. Before I jump in, I would like to give a brief history of the project. How did we get here? Who was involved? And when we started this project in the fall of 2017, I started with intensive literature review, what we know, what we don't know about riparian buffers, and I wrote a paper about it. And then besides finding what we know, what we don't know, the knowledge gaps from literature, we reached out a wide group of individuals and groups and interest groups about riparian buffers, asking feedback on research needs. And then we formed a steering committee of farmers, and with collaboration with Department of Ecology, we wrote a co-op. Then we did a 1-year pilot study where we tested materials, methods, and the design. Based on the feedback from this pilot study, we improved the design and we did 2 years of monitoring. And here we are sharing the result of the monitoring. So what's riparian buffer? For those of you who don't know, riparian buffer is a stream-side vegetation that protects the stream from adjacent land use. It has a lot of benefits for the aquatic ecosystem, such as filtering pollutants, sediment, nutrient pollution, and stabilizing the bank. It also moderates stream temperatures by providing shade and incorporates large woody debris, which improves the complexity of the habitat. Also be a source of shelter and food, not only for aquatic lives, but also for upland wildlife. But the benefits of buffer doesn't stop at the creek. It has wider benefits for our general environment. For example, trees store atmospheric carbon dioxide and reduce the impact of global warming, which is another word for carbon sequestration, increases biodiversity, provides a break from noise and wind pollution, and it can increase agricultural irrigation efficiency by reducing wind-related evapotranspiration, can enhance the aesthetic value of the property, reduces erosion and runoff. It can also be a source of income if they qualify for CREP, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which pays rental income for people who plant riparian buffer on their streamside property. Buffer can be regulatory or voluntary, can be applied both ways, but both had some width requirements. KCD mostly plants voluntary buffers, and the associated with requirements are for agricultural drainage assistance program, which plants 1 to 3 rows of trees on a newly dredged agricultural ditch, 1 to 3 rows of trees, or 3 to 12 feet wide buffer, depending on the waterway type and suitability for fish use. Another relatively narrow buffer is hedgerow, which follows the NRCS practice, and the minimum buffer width of a hedgerow buffer is 15 feet, and it can vary depending on the size and type of the waterway, where it can be, hedgerow can be applied or not, depends on the type and size of the waterway. The other one is riparian forest buffer, which is a minimum of 35 feet wide. Again, depending on the waterway type and purpose, it can be different width. Okay, if buffer has so much benefit for our ecosystem, why we don't have buffer everywhere, but there are some challenges associated with this practice. To mention a few, mainly takes land out of production. Sometimes the most fertile land could be at the riparian zone where the buffer should be, and creates competition for space with crop production. And landowners also have concerns with these weeds requirements. The minimum weeds requirements maybe sometimes can be more than they could afford to give up. Earlier I said it can enhance the aesthetic value of the property, but some might view it as a negative value on the aesthetics of the property. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, right? Drainage maintenance is the main concern with riparian buffer, and attract nuisance wildlife such as beaver, elk, deer, and lack of scientific evidence. They say some landowners say these buffer width requirements have a political background rather than science. Also perception of buffers, and some landowners are such that buffers are not going to improve the habitat situation. The problem is elsewhere. Even if we plant buffers, fish is not gonna come back. That kind of perception of buffers can be a problem. But what's at stake? Water quality. Mostly we plant buffer for improving water quality. According to the Department of Ecology, 2,400 water bodies in Washington state are impaired, according to the Federal Clean Water Act, and mostly for sediment, temperature, and pollution. More waterways added each year than get delisted, unfortunately. The riparian buffer is the main tool used to combat this problem. So there is always a question of how much buffer, because there is a competition for space. So when you look at literature, you will get a wide range of recommendations for different buffer purposes. As we said earlier, buffer provide different benefit, and for each literature suggested different buffer sizes. And the other concern is most of the studies come from forest land use, and especially for temperature, there is not much research on agricultural side, how buffers are effective in reducing stream temperature or moderating stream temperature. So what's discovery farms? So we've covered about buffers. Now let's move on to discovery farms. The discovery farm is a model we use to study the effectiveness of riparian buffer. Discovery Farms is a program developed by University of Wisconsin. It's a farmer-led on-farm research model, and it has a strong education and outreach component into it. Most discovery farms traditionally study edge of field water quality monitoring, but the model can be flexible to study anything really. And here in Washington, we used it to study different manure storage options, and this buffer effectiveness study too. The goal of Washington Discovery Farms Program is to increase our understanding of conservation practices, provide a strong outreach and education program, provide research-based information to policymakers, and balance the practical, economic, and effectiveness aspects of conservation practices, in this case, buffers. In addition to being farmer-led and on-farm, what makes Discovery Farms unique is its structure. Traditionally, research is all about the researcher. The researcher comes up with a researchable problem and conducts the research and publishes the result, or it gets shelved somewhere, doesn't necessarily reach the end user. But in this case, in Discovery Farms models, the farmers are involved from the beginning, from initiation of the project, and also in conducting the research as well. So once we identified the research, the knowledge gap from literature review, as I said earlier, we reached out to a wide range of groups and individuals to ask for research questions, research needs. These are a list of people. It's not exclusive, there are more. So they provided us a lot of feedback about research needs in this area. We conducted a stakeholders meeting sometime in 2018 to summarize and prioritize the research needs we gathered so far. So the stakeholders, we asked the stakeholders to prioritize the research needs and comparing different buffer sizes on different kind of waterways was the most rated one. Also, buffer provides lots of functions and you need different size of buffer for different functions. So if we can't have it all, if we have to prioritize which buffer functions are especially important for agricultural setting, and the stakeholders suggested temperature would be the most important function to study first. Then we formed a steering committee of farmers, a wide range of farmers from vegetable to cattle beef farmers. And they after discussing the research needs from the stakeholder input and from the literature review, they prioritized to study temperature as well. With that, but why temperature? Why is temperature so important? It's good to know. Temperature affects metabolism of most aquatic organisms, including fish. It affects their food requirement, appetite, and digestion rate. It can make them less competent with other species, and it can make them vulnerable to predators and susceptible to disease and parasite because of their weak metabolism. It doesn't affect only the adult fish, it also affects growth and development rate of embryos and alevins, affects the timing of life cycle events such as adult migrations, fry emergence, and multiplication. It also disrupts the life cycle of other aquatic invertebrates, which messes up the food chain. So what are the factors that affect stream temperature? Climatic factors such as solar radiation, precipitation, and wind can affect stream temperature. Also geologic factors such as its interaction with the underground water. Channel characteristics, how wide, how deep, how much water, how fast it's flowing can affect the stream temperature. And the buffer characteristics such as buffer width, length, density, height, all have impact on the stream temperature. So if we wanted to study the impact of buffer, these two have to be constant, right? But in practice, that's very hard to find, where the channel stays stable, the flow, the depth, the everything like similar, then different size of buffer in agricultural setting. You can't find that. So what we did is we measure a range of buffer characteristics, a range of channel characteristics, and try to establish the relationship and they say how they interact to impact the stream temperature. That's what we looked at. So once we identified our research priority, we need a co-op quality assurance project plan. We collaborated with the Department of Ecology to write a co-op. The co-op covers who, what, where, what, and how the research should be done. And it's important for any study, but more importantly, to message for policymakers. And we also used a peer-reviewed established methods for all our data collections. So the objective of this study is to evaluate the effectiveness of riparian buffer on stream temperature, to better understand the buffer and channel attributes that affect stream temperature, and to determine criteria to be used to recommend optimum buffer size for moderating stream temperature. Our study area is across King County Ag land. We studied 30 sites for 2 years. Most of the sites coincide. Where you see overlapping colors, it means we have 2-year data. Some of them where you see a single color, that means we have only 1-year data. Most of our buffers are older than 5 years, so they have some canopy, provide some shade, but also we have some controls where there is no buffer, and also like a natural forest controls. So the study was conducted for 2 years. What data did we collect? We used HOBO UTVI 001 to collect stream temperature. We installed temperature sensors upstream and downstream of the streams, the buffer, the reach where we're working at. And we have one air temperature somewhere in the middle of that length attached to a tree or a stake. We also measured flow, volume, and discharge depths, buffer, bank widths, weighted widths, bank height. We also measured tree height using a laser rangefinder with solar pathfinder to measure shade. So you take a picture of the canopy like this, and this will give you how much shade that specific location can receive at any time of the year. This is how we conduct our stream transect. We set up a transect perpendicular to the creek, 100 feet apart, and we take both riparian and channel measurements at each transect, and we average it out for the site. So I want to mention some challenges throughout this problem because it has some impact on the result too. So finding good sites was the main challenge of this project. We are looking for 30 sites, and it's in summer where most creeks go dry. And our pool was KCD customers who planted buffers throughout the past 2 decades. Sometimes the owners change, we don't have contact with the new owner. Sometimes landowners don't get back to us. So finding enough good sites was a major challenge of this project. But also once we started, some of the continuous problems, lots of loggers, weather, sometimes the creek dries too quick, then the logger hangs out in the air, or beaver flooding the creek, or taking my logger, or people pulling out accidentally my loggers. Site characteristics. So I want you to imagine what kind of creek I'm talking about. Bank full widths, anywhere from 5 feet to 35 feet bank full widths. Most of them very narrow, less than 20 feet wide. stream depths. So it's summer, most of them are dry, but there are some creeks that hold on to the water. So the maximum depth was 1.75 feet, but most of them less than half feet deep. Discharge as high as 10 cubic feet per second, but most of them less than 2 cubic feet per second. Stream velocity maximum was 1.6 feet per second, but again, most of them barely flow, like low flow, like less than 0.5 feet per second. We also have substrate type and stream orientation data. Riparian characteristics: shade anywhere from 5 to 95%, tree height 2, which is almost nothing, to maximum tree height, buffer width, again from nothing to as wide as it gets, 65 feet. Length of the reach we studied anywhere between 100. This is the shortest, and I don't have very short ones like this. This is only one, but maximum 2,500. So data analysis, we took channel characteristics and buffer characteristics. We trying to establish relationships, how they impact stream temperature. So as a response variable, we have shade, what are factors affecting shade? And also shade can influence temperature too. Shade can be input or output variable. We also see how air temperature is affected and stream temperature. And I have lots of data, but I will present here the most important ones, the significant ones. Shade, let's see how shade. So this is a relationship between tree height and riparian shade. This is percent shade and tree height in feet. The R square means this shows the strength of the relationship between the two variables, and 100% means one-to-one perfect relationship. So the higher the better for R square to be able to predict properly. So as you see, the relationship is logarithmic. What that means is the first few feet of the height is especially very important. At some point, as the tree grows further, you get less and less benefit, because at some point it's going to close the canopy and you're not going to get much shade, extra shade. This is a relationship between buffer width and shade, percent shade, and buffer width in feet. And 48% of the variation in shade can be explained by buffer width. And the relationship is again logarithmic, which means the first few linear feet of the buffer is especially important. At some point, no matter how wide the buffer gets, you get less and less response or no additional benefit in shade. This is a relationship between riparian shade and bank width. Though I said I wouldn't show non-significant ones, bank width is the most important one because that's how mostly we classify hedgerow, riparian buffer. So in this study, what we saw is that this is percent shade, this is bank width in feet, and the relationship, as you see, is non-existent, almost flat line, which means is bank width under 35 feet has no impact on riparian shade. So we looked at air temperature and shade. Now we move on to the other response variable. We have air temperature. This is a relationship between air temperature and tree height. So 77% of the variation in air temperature can be explained by tree height. Again, the relationship is logarithmic. Again, daily maximum air temperature versus buffer width, 65% relationship. So again, logarithmic relationship, the first few linear feet of the buffer is especially important in reducing daily maximum stream temperature. So as the buffer gets wider, you get less and less response. It's important to note that also, as you see here, the R square 77% and here 65%. So the height of the tree is more important than the width of the buffer. We saw that also in shade too. This is a relationship between air temperature and maximum daily air temperature and shade. A linear relationship, this is the only linear relationship I will show you today, and 67% of the variation in air temperature can be explained by shade. So we move on to stream temperature. We looked at shade and air temperature. Now we will look at stream temperature. Maybe you would think why we look at air temperature isn't our interest on stream temperature. The answer to that is the two are very highly correlated, and stream temperature, air temperature is relatively easier to predict than stream temperature because there is a lot of complexity with stream temperature. Since both are mainly impacted by solar radiation, by looking at how the buffer changes air temperature, we can predict also how it impacts the stream temperature. There are a lot more things going on in the stream temperature. So let's see what we found with the stream temperature. This is the change in stream temperature within our reach between upstream and downstream, the change in temperature and percent shade. The relationship is again logarithmic. So there is big impact as the shade increases. The first few percents of the shade is highly important, but as here we see a lot of noise in percent temperature change. There is good shade, but the temperature range varies. As you see here, some noise. We will look closely to that. Here, what I did is, so we have agricultural drainage ditches, which have ADAP buffers, very narrow buffers, and we also have non-ADAP buffers, which have hedgerow and riparian forest buffer. The yellow ones show agricultural drainage ditches with 1 to 3 rows of trees, and the blue ones are the non-ADAP ones. So as you can see here, those ADAP ones would warm up more than the others, even with good shade. But still, the blue also still have some variation, still with good shade. We'll look into that too. This is a relationship between a change in stream temperature and the mean velocity. So as velocity increases, the change in stream temperature reduces. When the flow increases, the creek is able to maintain its temperature. So the change gets to zero, close to zero. The relationship is not very strong. As you can see, 24% of the variation in change in stream temperature depends on velocity. But here what I did is, so we know the impact of shade. So I removed the poorly shaded ones. I excluded them from this study, from this slide. And with shade greater than 60%, what explains the variation in change in stream temperature? So 39% of the variation in change in stream temperature is due to velocity, flow velocity. That means it explains the rest of the variations that were not explained by shade. So here what I did is the same thing, but I showed the ADAP ones, agricultural drainage ditches, which have relatively narrow buffers with orange colors. So what it means is, as you can see, they are on the low flow side. They are especially slow to flow, and they change its temperature more than the blue ones, which were the hedgerow and riparian buffer routes. here is the relationship between, so we have variable stream lengths, as I said earlier. So this is the relationship between the stream lengths and change in stream temperature. What is natural is for creeks from the headwater as they go into the river, the temperature naturally increases. So that's what, more or less we can see it here increasing, but though the relationship is very weak. So again, what I looked is I removed the impact of shade. Where shade is greater than 60%, is length still does it still matter in change in stream temperature? No. As you can see here, the relationship disappears. So if we have good flow and shade, we can minimize that natural trend of creeks going warmer as they go down. This is the relationship between bank widths and change in stream temperature. I showed earlier that bank widths less than 35 feet, 32 feet to be exact, have no relationship in shade effectiveness. It's the same thing we see here, almost flat line. So channels as narrow than like less than 30 feet could be treated with the same shade. And so we saw one-to-one relationship, what factors affect stream temperature. Are they commutative? Can we add them cumulative? And be able to predict the stream change in stream temperature better. By combining shade velocity and the stream length, we can predict 69% of change in stream temperature, and the relationship is very highly significant, as you can see here. So with that, I will move on to conclusion. What did we learn from all of this? Buffer width and height have a strong relationship with shade, air, and stream temperature. And the first few feet of width and height of the buffer are especially important. Shade has a stronger influence on air temperature than the stream temperature. We saw that the R square was very high on the relationship between shade and air temperatures and the stream temperature. And the other thing we learned is flow velocity is the second most important predictor of change in stream temperature next to shade. Continuity of the buffer is more important than its width. So we saw that as the buffer, as the length increase with shade and with good shade and with velocity, we saw that the relationship, the impact of length reduces. So I mean, its continuity is more important than the length of the buffer width. Also, bank full width less than 35 feet has no impact on shade and on shade effectiveness and stream temperature. So to provide some practical recommendation, both based on this. So we saw that the first few feet of the buffer or the first few height of the buffer is very especially important, especially the width of the buffer. The first few feet is especially important. So narrow buffer is more important than no buffer. This is in line with most previous studies. Most literature suggests that there is a great difference between no buffer and buffer, but within different size of buffers, there is no much difference. This is an agreement with previous findings as well. And so buffer width requirements should not come at the cost of losing landowners who can do only narrow buffer for different reasons. So it means like one size fits all doesn't apply. I mean, we're focusing on the continuity of the buffer is more important than pushing for wider buffer. Restoring and increasing flow could help in temperature regulation. So things we can do to improve flow can also improve the temperature of the creeks. Maybe that's one thing we all can do, because not all of us have a creek in our properties that we apply shade on, but we can use water wisely and conserve water wisely to improve the flows of our creeks, because our water system is connected and what we do affects the entire ecosystem. Riparian shade is the best tool to measure buffer effectiveness, since air temperature and the stream temperature are not very stable. Like, it takes time to collect that data and more expensive. When we want to measure the effectiveness of a buffer, maybe just looking at the shade could be important. And the Solar Pathfinder is a very easy and effective tool to use for that. Also, based on what we see, KCD's relatively narrow riparian buffer practices, the work showed that this KCD's implementation of relatively narrow buffer widths are effective in moderating stream temperature. So I would like to acknowledge a lot of groups who helped this project get here, especially, most importantly, Scott Colliard from the Department of Ecology Environmental Assistance Program and his team were very, very instrumental in this project. It was a great collaboration work from day one, from writing the co-op, providing training, sharing tools, even giving us staff. I'm very grateful. All the landowners who allowed us to collect the data, the steering committee who helped us shape up this project in the earlier phase, and all the stakeholders who provided feedback, and all fellow KCDians, too many to mention a name, all former and current KCD people who helped this project in one way or another. I'm very grateful. Thank you. And thank you to you, my all audiences, for making the time to listen to this presentation.